Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We are in the chapter The Eternal and the Individual, the last line of page 397 in my book, beginning with in our practical dealings with life. So we've been away for a month, just a month. Can we pick up with a little summary?
This chapter, Sriranga is dealing with the individual and the eternal. Earlier also, his very important point that he makes throughout Life Divine is that the highest and the lowest are all connected. The others, many other systems, they think of them as being opposites. There is God and there is the devil. There is the good and there is the evil. So they think that if you want God, you have to go up only. But Srimla is constantly insisting that God is there everywhere. He is basing his philosophy on the Vedanta, the Advaita, non-duality. Everything is the divine. Only there is a gradation. If you consider divine to be light, he is absolute light at the highest level, but he is also diminishing his light, and becoming darkness here. But darkness, he is the divine. It's one aspect of the divine. If you think of it as the infinite, then he limits his infinity and becomes finite here. He is the formless. He limits his and makes himself into form and comes down here. So everything is divine, but in different gradations. This is his basic contribution, because he wants to tell that he wants to establish the fact that a divine life upon earth is possible. Until now, we have always had the impression that this world is permanently evil, permanently limited, permanently false. So he wants to break that. He wants to say, if you are here, yes, you do see falsehood, you do see limitation, you do see perversity and ignorance. But you have to note that there is a slow gradation. First from matter is life, and from life matter, from mind, and from mind there will be another higher level, the supermind. So this is his main contribution, and he has actually practically worked for that. He and the mother have been able to break down the next level of consciousness into the physical world, which was not there before. So this is, he is continuing the discussion, the eternal and the individual. So
Now, I wanted to mention that I've been reading the book on Sri Aurobindo's talks with Pavitra, when he says, I don't recommend this yoga for anyone. But it was in 1925, before the descent of Krishna into his, and so things changed after that. And of course they changed with Mother also, 56.
yeah.
Yeah.
But he always maintained that the integral yoga is the most difficult, but the most satisfying in the end, because you have the divine in all the aspects. And he certainly doesn't want numbers. He says numbers have no importance. I don't want everybody. In fact, he used to, people used to say, I want to do yoga with you. So he used to ask them again, what do you intend? What is your purpose in doing yoga? So they say, we want peace and calm. He says, then go to Ramanashram, not here. Because here you won't get peace and calm in the beginning. You'll get it in the end after a lot of trouble and a lot of struggle. So it's not for everybody. Certainly not. And I have come across 2 or 3 cases, very serious yogis, but they couldn't fit here, because this is not for everybody. One of them said, I went to the meditation in the playground the other day, and there was music. How can you concentrate with music? You need silence. And he had many experiences also. Okay? So like that, there were several. So it's not for everybody. Only those who are inclined to have a waking samadhi. That means you are in the normal consciousness, you are leading a normal life, and yet you are in a consciousness which is transformed. So, but the first step going to the spiritual planes of consciousness is common to all. It is common to Sri Aurobindo also. The others are stopping at the experience of the self. Sri Aurobindo says, that's fine, but then my yoga starts at that level, because then you have to transform the body-mind life. So the others are interested in liberation of the soul, but not the body-mind life, not the nature. But Sri Aurobindo says, first liberate your soul, go to the level 2 of the spiritual planes of consciousness, then liberate your nature and make it perfect. Okay. So that is the speciality. So that's why he is now talking of the individual and the eternal. They are essentially the same, though they are in different conditions. The eternal is in timelessness, spacelessness, formlessness. And the individual is in time and space, and he has a form. So even the soul has a form. Even the soul is individual. The soul is essentially divine, but still it is individual. Your soul and my soul, essentially the same, but all different. Your soul will have a different purpose in life, her purpose will have a different purpose in life, my aim in life will be different. So,
Good.
Since it's a month, we'll first read the summary of what he has said in the previous one to get the link. Okay? So, the truth of the individuality, of commonality, and their third truth that contains both becomes clear as we rise. In my own words, I am reading the summary of what he said earlier. Okay, so, and besides, before I start that, he says that the individual and the supreme is the essence of everybody. Okay, the eternal is there in everybody. So, there is, the eternal is common to all. The individual is not common to all. You have a different individuality, you have a different individuality, I have a different individuality. But there is something common. So, just like all cats have the catness in them, but each one is different. That's an individual and there is a commonality. So, exactly in the same way, you have a body, I have a body, all different, individual bodies. Yet they are common. They are made of the same substance. So, there is the individuality, then there is a commonality, and there is a third level where both are valid at the same time. At our level, the commonality is not so common. It is not so comprehensive. We can't see it. But if you go to the third level, you see both. Okay? So this truth of the individuality, of commonality, and the third truth that contains both becomes clearer as we rise in the scale of consciousness. We realize the truth of distinctions and differences, but also their limits. Plant, animal, and man are all different, but a deeper, sharper look shows that plant is animal in the making, that animal is on the way to becoming man, that man is really animal but with something extra in him, that man is potential God. Each of these is the eternal in his evolutionary steps, but concealed and in the process of revealing himself. Man himself is all his past. He is not only the present, he is all his past and contains all potentiality of the future. He is the individual, yet represents mankind. To understand him fully, we have to see his individuality, his commonality, and the essential truth that he is. All three elements are to be taken together and none rejected. This is what Sandra said in the previous one. Okay? So now we start reading the next para. In our practical dealings with life, we have to arrive at the same truth. For certain practical ends, we have to say that a thing is good or bad, beautiful or ugly, just or unjust, and act upon that statement. But if we limit ourselves by it, we do not get at real knowledge. The law of contradictions here is only valid insofar as two different and opposite statements cannot be true of the same thing at the same time, in the same field, in the same respect, from the same point of view, and for the same practical purpose. So, how much limitation is there? Commonality is there, but differences also are there. But, as he says, the law of contradictions here is only valid insofar as two different and opposite statements cannot be true of the same thing at the same thing, same time, same field, same respect, from the same point of view, and for some same practical purpose. There's a difference.
But he begins by saying, in our practical dealings
That's right.
with life.
Yeah. And that's why you said in the previous para, as we keep rising in consciousness, the individuality starts becoming more and more faint, and the commonality starts increasing until you have also the cosmic consciousness. The whole cosmos is inside you. Okay? So that's what he's saying. A great war, destruction, or violent, all upheaving revolution, for example, may present itself to us as an evil, a virulent and catastrophic disorder. And it is so in certain respects, results, ways of looking at it. But from others, it may be a great good, since it rapidly clears the field for a new good or a more satisfying order. No man is simply good or simply bad. Every man is a mixture of contraries. Even we find these contraries often inextricably mixed up in a single feeling, a single action. All kinds of conflicting qualities, powers, values meet together and run into each other to make up our action, life, nature. We can only understand entirely if we get to some sense of the absolute and yet look at its workings in all the relativities which are being manifested. Look not only at each by itself, but each in relation to all and to that which exceeds and reconciles them all. In fact, we can only know by getting to the divine view and purpose in things, and not merely looking at our own, though our own limited human view and momentary purpose have their validity in this word is pronounced actually in a very funny way.
Cadre.
Yeah, cadre. Okay.
Cadre.
Yeah, that's right. In the cadre, the framework, if you want, of the all. For behind all relativities, there is this absolute which gives them their being and their justification. No particular act or arrangement in the world is by itself absolute justice, but there is behind all acts and arrangements something absolute which we call justice, which expresses itself through their relativities and which we would realize if our view and knowledge were comprehensive instead of being as they are partial, superficial, limited to a few ostensible facts and appearances. So too, there is an absolute good and an absolute beauty. But we can only get a glimpse of it if we embrace all things impartially and get beyond their appearances to some sense of that which, between them, all and each are by their complex terms trying to state and work out, not an indeterminate, for the indeterminate being only the original stuff, or perhaps the packed condition of determinations, would explain by itself nothing at all, but the absolute. We can indeed follow the opposite method of breaking up all things and refusing to look at them as a whole and in relation to that which justifies them, and so create an intellectual conception of absolute evil, absolute injustice, absolute hideousness, painfulness, triviality, vulgarity, or vanity of all things. But that is to pursue to its extreme the method of the ignorance, whose view is based upon division. We cannot rightly so deal with the divine workings, because the absolute expresses itself through relativities, the secret of which we find it difficult to fathom. The secret of which we find it difficult to fathom, because to our limited view, everything appears to be a purposeless play of oppositions and negatives, or a mass of contradictions. We cannot conclude that our first limited view is right, or that all is a vain delusion of the mind and has no reality. Nor can we solve all by an original unreconciled contradiction, which is to explain all the rest. The human reason is wrong in attaching a separate and definitive value to each contradiction by itself, or getting rid of one by altogether denying the other. But it is right in refusing to accept as final and as the last word the coupling of contradictions which have in no way been reconciled together, or have not found their source and significance in something beyond their opposition.
Long
Big
paragraph.
para. Big para. Again, we come back to the idea that there are grades. As we said at the beginning, there is light on top, and the light fades and becomes darkness at the bottom. So it is all the same stuff, same vibration in different degrees. Formlessness, form. Oneness, multiplicity. Okay, then the eternal and the individual. Infinity and finite. So it depends on where you are. So where you are, your view of looking at things will be valid for you at that level. But don't jump to the conclusion that that's the only truth. That's what he's
But
saying.
many of the religions or philosophies do jump to that conclusion.
Yes, that's the whole problem.
Yes.
Because of our ignorance, we do that.
Yeah.
Even we'll do that. We, in the practical life, we'll do that. But theoretically, we know that all these contradictions are only the one becoming the many. And you will find that only at the absolute truth. Now, there's something interesting he's saying also. Logically, you can also think of absolute evil, absolute non-existence, absolute perversion, absolute cruelty, everything you can find. But that actually does not exist by itself. It does exist. Darkness does exist, but it is not a fundamental reality. It exists only because there is light. But if darkness is not there, light will exist. But if light is not there, darkness cannot exist. So that's the absolute and the other relativities. That the superconscient has got an absolute existence. The inconscient is also an absolute, but it is conditional, not an absolute existing all by itself. This is a conditional reality.
Because it contains within it.
Yeah, because it is light becoming darkness.
Yes.
That's why. So, big para, that's basically what he explained to us. Don't stop at any one middle level and think that that's the only truth. You have to know the above and you have to also know the below. We cannot either effect a reconciliation or explanation of the original contradictions of existence by taking refuge in our concept of time. Okay? Time as we know or conceive it is only our means of realizing things in succession, one after the other. It is a condition and cause of conditions. It's a condition and cause of conditions. Varies on different planes of existence. Varies even for beings on one and the same plane. That is to say, it is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. They work themselves out in detail by time and seem to our mental and vital being to be determined by it. But that seeming does not carry us back to our sources and principles. We make the distinction of conditioned and unconditioned, and we imagine that the unconditioned became conditioned, the infinite became finite at some date in time, and may cease to be finite at some other date in time, because it so appears to us in details. Particulars, or with regard to this or that system of things. But if we look at existence as a whole, we see that infinite and finite coexist and exist in and by each other. Even if our universe were to disappear and reappear rhythmically in time, as was the old belief, that too would be only a large detail and would not show that at a particular time all condition ceases in the whole range of infinite existence and all being becomes the unconditioned. At another, it again takes on the reality or the appearance of conditions. The first source and primary relations lie beyond our mental divisions of time, in the divine timelessness, or else in the indivisible or eternal time, of which our divisions and our successions are only figures in a mental experience. So he has said many things, and it might be interesting to go through because mother's experiences also come into the picture. We can also discuss what he has.
Yes.
Okay, so this para will go through
we'll
each
go
sentence.
through sentence by
Yeah.
sentence.
So, we cannot either effect a reconciliation or explanation of the original contradictions of existence by taking refuge in our concepts of time. So, we are in time, and so everything at the lowest level there is time, at the highest level there is no time. So, here contradictions are there because of time, you can say. But he says you can't do that. Time, as we know, he is explaining why. Because time is also flexible, something very strange. Time, as we know or conceive it, is only our means of realizing things in succession, one by one. When we think of time, past, present, and future. So, it is a condition and cause of conditions. Varies on different planes of existence. Varies even for beings on one and the same plane. That is to say, it is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. This is worth discussing, what he is saying.
Yes.
So, he is saying that at every level of consciousness, time varies. Okay? So, at our level, time we can measure. But as we go into the spiritual planes of consciousness, time ceases because you enter into a consciousness which is immutable. So, there is no movement there at all. And if there is no movement, there is no time. Time and movement always go together. So, you are in a consciousness which is absolutely immutable, but you see all the mutability in the physical world. You are sitting on the mountain top and looking at everything below moving, but yourself, nothing is moving. You are absolutely silent. And now it's interesting. Is it possible to be at the several levels at the same time? That is waking samadhi. That's possible. If you are in the physical world and I'm talking to you, yet my consciousness is at a higher level, my consciousness is at 2 levels. Then I should be able to sense 2 different ways of time. And that's exactly what happened to Mother. She has mentioned that very clearly in her talks.
She says it's a very interesting
in
experience.
Pardon?
A very interesting experience,
Yes.
she says.
Yes. She says that time is flexible. She says that something that should take only 3 minutes or 4 minutes, brushing my teeth. She has mentioned that. Should take only 3 minutes or 4 minutes. It's taking half an hour. And something that should take a long time is condensed in a very short time. We come back again to the idea that the infinite and the finite are involved in each other. The famous lines of William Blake.
Yes.
Okay, remember? That's why it's so interesting, those 4 lines. You remember the lines? To see a world in a grain of sand.
And eternity in an hour. Is that it?
Yeah. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand.
Yes.
And eternity in hours,
Yeah.
And heaven in a wildflower.
Yes. Yes.
So, what is the first one? To see a world in a grain of sand.
Yes.
And heaven in a wild flower.
Right.
Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So, this is what Srimad is saying in different words.
So when these astronauts go deep into space, and then one has a brother on Earth, and he returns and the brother is 90 years old, and they were the same age.
That we come back to Einstein's theory.
Yes.
That when you are moving, he says, time slows down. The faster you go towards the speed of light, time slows down. So the 2 twins, he gives the example of the two twins.
Yes.
One is on Earth and the other goes into interstellar space and comes back after 2 years. He sees that his twin brother is dead, gone. 50 or 60 years have already gone by here. So that's what Srimad is also saying. He's saying that time for you will be different for me. It's not the same for you and me.
No, exactly.
That's what he's saying. Let alone different planes of consciousness. So, and this is something that has been experienced actually also in the experience of the Bermuda Triangle. If you remember, that these are not stories, these are actual facts. A 350 passenger modern jet, Boeing aircraft, going, and then it enters into a space which is not physical space but vital space, life space. Time slows down and the radars don't work and they are going through a tunnel, hazy, fuzzy, cloudy tunnel, and then suddenly they find that there's no radio contact, there's no radar contact, nothing. And suddenly they come out again, clear sky, you are in the physical world. You have gone into a place where time slowed down. You have come down, you have come 15 minutes before the landing time in the next airport. 15 minutes you have saved because you slowed down. They still don't know what the solution is.
Yes.
But if you read this para, you will understand.
Yeah.
Time is different on different planes of consciousness. Okay, so time as we know it, that we read just now, okay, for beings, and that is to say, it is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. They work themselves out in detail by time and seem to our mental and vital being to be determined by it. But that seeming does not carry us back to their sources and principles. We make the distinction of conditioned and unconditioned, and we imagine that the unconditioned became conditioned, the infinite became finite at some date in time, and may cease to be finite at some other date in time, because it so appears to us in details, particulars, or with regard to this or that system of things. So, this will, what is meant by conditioned and unconditioned? Okay, so we are all conditioned. Our body is conditioning us. You can think of it is limiting you. It is conditioning you, putting conditions on you. Okay. Then your body is putting conditions on you, your vital is putting conditions on you, your mind is also putting conditions on you. But when your soul escapes, these conditions disappear. You are free. You are not limited anymore. So that's the unconditioned, total freedom. No form, no features, an absolute featurelessness, no conditions at all. Try and imagine that. That's a Brahmic consciousness.
Our habits condition us.
Yes, also. Everything. Even if you don't have habits, you are conditioned. That's our point.
True.
And that's what happens to the soul when it escapes and goes up. It is unconditioned, free. Okay. So they work themselves out in detail by time and seem to our mental and vital being to be determined by it. But that seeming does not carry us back to their sources and principles. So we read that. We make the distinction of conditioned and unconditioned, and we imagine that the unconditioned becomes conditioned and infinite became finite at some date in time and may cease to be finite at some other date in time, because it so appears to us in details, particulars, or with regard to this or that system of things. Now, this is exactly what science says. The Big Bang Theory. The world began 14 billion years ago. Obviously, it's nonsense. That's exactly what Shamdar is saying. You imagine that like that, but it's not like that at all.
And the question they raise is, what was before that?
Yeah, exactly. So, the unconditioned is eternal, the conditioned also is eternal. There is no beginning and no end. That's what he is saying. Okay, so because it so appears to us in detail. But if we look at existence as a whole, now, when can you look at existence as a whole? Not when you are at level 1, at our level of ignorance, not even at the spiritual levels of consciousness, but you start looking at existence in a much bigger way. You can look at existence only at the 3rd level where you are seeing everything. Okay, so if you look at existence as a whole, we see that infinite and finite coexist and exist in and by each other. So, this is a small sentence, but we'll look at what he's saying. The infinite and the finite are not separate, they are involved in each other. Exactly those 4 lines of William Blake. Okay. The infinite contains the possibility of the finite can expand itself and become the infinite. Even if our universe were to disappear and reappear rhythmically in time, as was the old belief, that too would be only a large detail and would not show that at a particular time all condition ceases in a whole range of infinite existence and all being becomes the unconditioned. At another, it again takes on the reality or the appearance of conditions. So, there is this theory that the physical world is being created and destroyed simultaneously. So, this idea we have also discussed in other places also.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, but it is Brahma who creates, Shiva who destroys, but instantaneously. So, you feel it is a continuous movement. If there were a little gap between the creation and the destruction, let's say 1 second, then you will see everything being destroyed, but everything being recreated. But if this 1 second becomes half a second, 1 millionth of a second, 1 billionth of a second, then you will not see the breaking and the creating. There you will see it as a continuous action. So that was the old idea. So this is what Srimde is saying, that you can see it in that way if you want. Okay, it's possible to see it in that way. So, as was the old belief, that too would be only a large detail and would not show that at a particular time all conditions ceases in the whole range of infinite existence and all being becomes the unconditioned. At another, it again takes on the reality and the appearance of conditions. The first source and primary relations lie beyond our mental divisions of time, in the divine timelessness, or else in the indivisible or eternal time, of which our divisions and our successions are only figures in a mental experience.
Powerful.
So, when you are in the mental world, you will see time and space. But if you are in the divine timelessness, okay, and the divine timelessness starts even at level 2, in the spiritual planes of consciousness. When you are in the self, you are in timelessness. And when you are in timelessness, you realize that you always have been, that you are immortal. That's why you realize the immortality of your own being. I always have existed and I will always exist in the future. That's the realization of immortality. There we see that all meats and all principles, all persistent realities of existence, for the finite as a principle of being is as persistent as the infinite, stand in a primary relation to each other in a free, not an exclusive unity of the absolute, and that the way they present themselves to us in a material or a mental world is only a working out of them in secondary, tertiary, or yet lower realities. The absolute has not become the contrary of itself and assumed at a certain date real or unreal relativities of which it was originally incapable, nor has the one become by miracle the many, nor the unconditioned deviated into the conditioned, nor the unqualitied sprouted out into qualities. These oppositions are only the conveniences of our mental consciousness, our divisions of the indivisible. The things they represent are not fictions, they are realities. But they are not rightly known if they are set in irreconcilable opposition to or separation from each other. For there is no such irreconcilable opposition or separation of them in the all view of the Absolute. This is the weakness not only of our scientific divisions and metaphysical distinctions, but of our exclusive spiritual realizations, which are only exclusive because to arrive at them we have to start from our limiting and dividing mental consciousness. We have to make the metaphysical distinctions in order to help our intelligence towards a truth which exceeds it, because it is only so that it can escape from the confusions of our first undistinguishing mental view of things. But if we bind ourselves by them to the end, we make chains of what should only have been first helps. We have to make use too of distinct spiritual realizations which may at first seem contrary to each other, because as mental beings it is difficult or impossible for us to seize at once, largely and completely, what is beyond our mentality. But we err if we intellectualize them into soul truths, as when we assert that the impersonal must be the one ultimate realization and the rest creation of Maya, or that declare the Saguna, the divine in its qualities, to be that and thrust away the impersonality from our spiritual experience. We have to see that both these realizations of the great spiritual seekers are equally valid in themselves, equally invalid against each other. They are one and the same reality experienced on two sides, which are both necessary for the full knowledge and experience of each other and of that which they both are. So is it with the one and the many, the finite and the infinite, the transcendent and the cosmic, the individual and the universal, the transcendent and the cosmic, the individual and the universal. Each is the other as well as itself, and neither can be entirely known without the other and without exceeding their appearance of contrary oppositions. So, same idea continuing again throughout. That when we are in limited consciousness, we see contradictions. When we go to the higher levels of consciousness, these contradictions are more and more harmonized. That's basically what he's saying. We see then that there are three terms of the one existence: transcendent, universal, and individual, and that each of these always contains, secretly or overtly, the two others. The transcendent possesses itself always and controls the other two as the basis of its own temporal possibilities. That is the divine, the eternal, all possessing God consciousness, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, which informs, embraces, governs all existences. The human being is here on earth the highest power of the third term, the individual, for he alone can work out at its critical turning point that movement of self manifestation which appears to us as the involution and evolution of the divine consciousness between the two terms of the ignorance and the knowledge. The power of the individual to possess in his consciousness by self knowledge his unity with the transcendent and the universal, with the one being and all beings, and to live in that knowledge and transform his life by it, is that which makes the working out of the divine self manifestation through the individual possible. The arrival of the individual, not in one but in all, and the divine life is the sole conceivable object of the movement. The existence of the individual is not an error, as many do suppose. Okay? It's not an error in some self of the Absolute, which that self afterwards discovers. For it is impossible that the absolute self awareness of anything that is one with it should be ignorant of its own truth and its own capacities and betrayed by that ignorance either into a false idea of itself which it has to correct or an impractical venture which it has to renounce. Neither is the individual existence a subordinate circumstance in a divine play or leela, a play which consists in a continual revolution through unending cycles of pleasure and suffering, without any higher hope in the leela itself or any issue from it except the occasional escape of a few from time to time out of their bondage to this ignorance. We might be compelled to hold that ruthless and disastrous view of God's workings. If man had no power of self transcendence or no power of transforming by self knowledge, the conditions of the play nearer and nearer to the truth of the divine delight. In that power lies the justification of individual existence. The individual and the universal unfolding in themselves the divine light, power, joy of transcendent Satchidananda, always manifest above them, always secret behind their surface appearances. This is the hidden intention, the ultimate significance of the divine play, the Leela. But it is in themselves, in their transformation, but it is in themselves, in their transformation, but also in their persistence and perfect relations, not in their self-annihilation, that must be unfolded. Otherwise, there would be no reason for their ever having existed. The possibility of the divine's unfolding in the individual is the secret of the enigma. His presence there and this intention of self-unfolding are the key to the world of knowledge, ignorance. So that ends the para, but essentially.
Thank you, Ranga.
Okay.
Namaste all. Namaste. Very, very important session today.